crazy divorces and abuse situations and secret second wives and all of these kind of horror stories. So women are like, I need a failsafe.
In your opinion, what are the biggest mistakes Muslims make when it comes to money and marriage?
I think a common one that's coming up nowadays is about mortgages and home ownership. One person might say, I want to rent forever because I don't believe these Islamic finance products are halal, and I don't want to go for the riba option either.
The right amount for man today was the market rate.
Think of it as a wedding present that you're getting from your husband. So if he can afford to get you a G-Wagon or a 5-star trip to Bali or the Bahamas or whatever, and that's what you want, be my guest.
What's your take on prenups? Are they appropriate or not?
I think, logically speaking, if I was to take all of the emotion outside of it, I think it makes absolute sense.
There was this phrase that emerged a few years ago that your money is your money and his money is your money as well. Is there any basis to that?
The short answer to that is no, but there's a caveat.
Today's episode, I'm joined by Khizar Mohammad. He's head of lead generation over at Nesta, which is a Sharia-compliant peer-to-peer property financing platform. And he used to be the community lead over at Islamic Finance Guru. He was also a trained scholar, a khateeb, and happens to be my local imam. So he's going to bring a very interesting lens to this topic that we're going to discuss today, which is all about Muslims, money, and marriages. It's quite a fiery topic today. So we're going to be talking about everything that people should and often don't consider before they take that leap and actually sign the nikah contract. Prenups, Mehrs, what are the rights of a man and what are the rights of a woman? We're going to get into all of that today. So, as always, I'm your host, Areeb Siddiqui, and this is Muslim Money Talk. Before we begin, we actually noticed only about 10% of you are subscribed to the podcast. So if you like what you're listening to and you want to hear more from us and see more things Muslim and money related, then please consider subscribing and of course leaving this episode a like and share it with your friends, leave us a comment or a review, because it really, really does help us out and help more people to find us. Thank you. Now back to the show. Hey there, assalamu alaikum, and thank you for joining us today.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah, Areeb. It's absolutely my pleasure.
And belated Eid Mubarak. It was Eid on Friday, today is Monday.
No, Eid Mubarak to you as well. It was a very hectic Eid for us. We had a wedding as well, so lots to do this weekend.
Nice, okay. And how was that overall? Very busy. Do many people get married on Eid?
So they didn't get married on Eid day. It was 2 days after Eid's. But what that means is there's a lot of running around.
Yeah, of course.
Before Eid day, after Eid day, there's a lot of talk of the marriage on Eid day, so it makes for an exciting weekend.
During the khutbah, did you actually do the nikah yourself?
So yeah, I did the khutbatun nikah, so the khutbah for the nikah, and then conducted the ceremony, as it will, where the wali, the bride's father, gave her away. And it was a touching experience because they were my wife's family, so I knew them quite well. But it was nice. Weddings are very happy occasions. Marriages in general, people are very excited about them. They say 3 of the best areas of business to go into, and this is a side tangent, but it relates to this, is 3 of the best areas to go into business is marriages, births, i.e. new babies coming into the world, and funerals, because these are times of high emotion and people love to spend and love to be fully invested in these moments.
So, wow, I've not heard that before, but that does make a lot of sense. Okay, and it's very topical for what we're discussing today.
Definitely.
We've had, I've always wondered this, we had Imam Shabir Hassan on from the nikah company, and he's conducted hundreds and hundreds of marriages. Do you ever get a bit nervous when you're actually performing that?
I think my years of being a khateeb have really kind of maybe desensitized the nerves a little bit. But I always find the dua of Musa alayhi salam very comforting, and I always make an effort to recite it before I'm ever going to do any kind of public speaking. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. And what I find is that I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the barakah from that dua, but it instantly kind of settles my nerves a little bit. And I understand the nikah is a big day for a lot of people. And 2 moments that tend to be fairly focused upon within the nikah or a wedding in general is either the khutbah of the nikah, because that's one time in the whole ceremony where everyone quietens down and listens to one person, or it's the food. So those are the two things that everyone going to the wedding will kind of be more conscious of.
And everyone's waiting for one to finish.
So I try to keep it short, keep it sweet, keep it to the point, and really keep it as general as I can, so that it's not just a kind of reminder to the new couple, but it's a reminder to all those people that are sitting there, anyone that's soon going to get married in the future, people that have even been married for years or decades. You know, that advice is always in handy.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, I've seen some khutbahs which are less than amazing. Sometimes, very often, it's like, well, you shouldn't be spending too much on the wedding, when it's clear that the couple have spent too much on the wedding. And it's like there's nothing they can do about it now. So it feels almost like they're getting a telling off. What stuff do you like to talk about?
I think I always like to bring it back to the purpose of marriage that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about in the Quran, which is for us to find sakina, mawadda, and rahmah within our marriages. That, you know, human beings are not made to be isolated and single. Like, I mean, Adam alayhi salam, he had Jannah with him when he was created. He was in the gardens of paradise. He was enjoying himself. But that emptiness he felt, who did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala send him when he felt lonely? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't give him parents. He didn't give him children. He didn't give him siblings. He gave him a spouse. Because naturally, human beings seek companionship. At least the vast majority of human beings do. And so every one of us has a desire. I'd say most generally 95% of people have a desire to get married and find that person and find that companionship. And so I think that, you know, I like to bring it back to that point that this is what marriage is all about. It's about respect, forgiveness, finding tranquility within each other. And I think sometimes in the hubbub of life, we kind of lose that.
We do. And sometimes it can feel very adversarial, especially when people start breaking down the nikah contract into like the very contractual elements of it.
Yeah.
People wanting to change things or negotiating meher amounts, you can forget about that beautiful reminder that you just gave us.
Yeah.
As well.
And I think there's a good reason for why people are so adversarial. And I do think it comes down to a lack of trust in society today. I think that in our parents' time, or maybe grandparents' time, things were a lot more kind of black and white. They lived in their villages or they lived in their cities or areas. Generally, their whole generations kind of stayed in one location. Everyone knew everyone, so there was greater trust in society. You kind of knew the neighbors' kids. You kind of knew everyone. So when intermarriages would happen between the neighbors or people, you generally knew who was who. Everyone knew, okay, this kid's the bad kid, or that girl, she's not suitable for marriage, or this guy, he's a bum and he's not working and he doesn't do this or contribute. So everyone kind of knew that, okay, if I marry my daughter to this person, he comes from an honorable family, he's from a good family. I'm sure there's still skeletons in the closet and stuff, but there was trust. But now with the age of social media, we've got, 1,001 horror stories online, and all the happy marriages are kind of drowned out by these loud stories that are online, and that creates this distrust in society where women are like, I don't want to be abused, so I need a big mahar, or I need financial security, or I need this, or I need that.
Yeah, you get echo chambers forming online on like
exactly
platforms where you've got even Muslim men going towards this red pill movement.
100%.
And then you've got Muslim women just hating on Muslim men, or specifically Pakistani men or Somali, or whoever they might be.
It's both ways.
Both ways for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Even with men, like you'll have that distrust of women that, oh, she'll divorce me after a few years and take the house that I've built and take this, and I'll be on the streets. And because both genders are now distrusting each other, all of a sudden they're becoming more picky, or they're making their marriage requirements harder.
For sure.
And that leads to a circular problem of making it harder to get married.
Gosh. Okay, I really want to dive into that, but before we do, let's rewind a little bit and let's talk about you, right, and your origins. You are a Sharia scholar, mashallah. You work in the Islamic finance industry. You also have experience dealing with family matters as well, just as your local imam, as my local imam as well. Which is a big deal. I've never had someone who's delivered my Friday prayers, Friday Jummah, just here. So that's very interesting, very cool. So I want to ask you: is this what you imagined you'd be doing as a child? Was anyone in your family a scholar before you? Was that always the plan?
Far from it, actually. So my family are very traditional Pakistanis. So in the sense, like, they're from the cities.
Yeah.
They were. I don't like to use the word modern, but I think it's probably the closest I can get to what an accurate description was. I mean, it was the kind of sense that, Islam is part of our culture.
Yeah.
It was very much looked at as a cultural element within our lives. Like, we would pray when we could, we would fast Ramadan, and we would give sadaqah, and if we can, go for Hajj. And that was kind of the extent to which Islam was incorporated into our lives, at least while we were growing up. And, that's how my parents learned it, and from my grandparents, and so on and so forth. That's just where they came from. And it so therefore kind of grew up, I guess, kind of fairly liberal, I'd say. Like, we were practicing Muslims, like, we would pray when we could, but like, in terms of anything deeper than just the 5 prayers, or if we even prayed 5 times a day, it might be 2 or 3 times a day at that point. We would just kind of not really consider Islam as a big thing outside of that. But then what really happened was that when I went to 6th form, I saw a lot of my friends, a lot of my non-Muslim friends were engaging in things that I was explicitly told I cannot engage in. So they might go drinking, they might go clubbing and partying. And when I was told that, okay, I can't do that, I understood that, okay, it's for religious reasons. But then I thought to myself, do I really believe this, or am I just kind of like here? If so, if I believe in it, then why am I not more committed to it? Because I knew for a fact that I wasn't praying all my prayers. I wasn't doing all the things that I should be doing as a Muslim. But I was like, if I don't believe in this stuff, then why am I holding myself back from enjoying my life? And that kind of led me to this journey where I was like, okay, I need to understand the Quran first, because like, how do I know this religion is true? And then I had a non-Muslim friend of mine say to me that, well, why are you looking at Islam only then? Because you're born in a Muslim family. So really, you should look at all the religions and see which one is true, because maybe you're being very biased. And I was like, that's valid. So I kind of went systematically, I kind of created this criteria in my head. I think I was probably 17, 18 at the time. And I was like, okay, if there is a religion from God or gods, na'udhu billah, it would have to be a universal religion that applied to all human beings, because I couldn't see a religion being specific to one person or one race or one people. It would have to be a religion that was there from the beginning. It can't have just shown up, in the last millennia or something, because for me, that would show that God forgot about all the humans before that. It would have to be logically consistent. Like, it couldn't not make sense. And I had a bunch of criterias like that. And as I looked into it, I just kind of I narrowed it down from the world religions, because one of the other criteria was that it had to have at least spread throughout the world, because that would mean that some people didn't get the message. So it kind of narrowed it down to the big religions. But then when you kind of put all the other filters on, like being logically consistent, it knocked out a few religions. Being there from the beginning of time, again, knocked out a few religions.
And when people say, oh, well, Islam's only been around here for 1,400 years, I think the easy pushback to that is, well, the message has always been the same.
Yeah.
Worship one God.
Exactly.
And that's the one thing that every single prophet in the Abrahamic tradition has always pushed the singular message that there is only one God.
And I think that's exactly why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran constantly references us to Adam alayhi salam and all the prophets throughout, to show that, no, this is what Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam is bringing to the Arabs at the time, is not something new. This has been here forever. It's just that you humans have kept on missing the message and losing it and corrupting it. So here's a final revelation to kind of set the record straight for you.
So what a powerful journey that you went on at the age of 18. And did you start your studies then? What happened?
Yes, exactly. So once I kind of came to the conclusion that, okay, only Islam is the viable truth, that's when I was like, okay, I need to understand this religion, because I would have I would watch a lot of talks online, and I would see lots of different opinions by scholars, and I would be like, he's contradicting what he's saying what he's saying, and it was confusing to me. And I even at that young age, I like to read a lot and I like to think for myself. I was very critical thinking. I enjoyed critical thinking. So I kind of was like, okay, I need to study this for myself, because I don't understand why so many scholars are differing on these different things. So then I started reading the Quran myself, and then coincidentally, my local imam started an Arabic course. And then I joined that Arabic course and I spent a lot of time with him. I started learning the basics of Arabic. From there, he kind of referred me onto As-Salam Institute, where I started studying over 10 years with Sheikh Muhammad Akram Nadwi. And he, mashallah, he was such an amazing scholar that all the thoughts that were in my mind, he was able to lay them out very clearly for me and help me understand the religion to a degree where I was able to be a lot more comfortable in my beliefs and be able to separate what was cultural and what was just the ijtihad or the kind of judgments of the scholars versus what was actually established by the religion and the deen itself. Yeah. And that really helped me in my journey. And once I got a taste of that, I just couldn't stop. So I just had to keep on studying more.
Wow. How did your family react?
In the beginning, I think my dad was very supportive. Yeah. He was very happy that I was going on this journey. My mum was more apprehensive, but from a careers perspective. She was thinking, okay, like, how is the corporate world going to view your long beard and you going off to pray at certain times? And bearing in mind, this is like 10, 15 years ago. I think there's about 10 years ago, sorry. There was a lot more, a lot less kind of inclusion of Muslims in the world.
Diversity, inclusion, the big Muslim societies.
Exactly.
Weren't as strong as they are.
Exactly. Yeah. So my mum was kind of worried from that point of view. Of course, she saw it as a good thing, but she was just kind of like, you should be a bit careful. Of course, we're still looking at a time where there was racism. I mean, there still is, but people back then, I think, were a lot more forthcoming. And you had all this stuff with ISIS going on and all of that. So you had worries from family members outside of my immediate family that were kind of like, he's getting radicalized, because you had these stories coming up with people going to X countries and committing X atrocities. And then my family members were like worried that was going to be me. So, and I don't think that's an unfair worry to have. I think that's common, based on what they're seeing. It's very fair of them to think that. But alhamdulillah, what I think a difference that I probably did that made sure that I didn't end up on that kind of track was that I stuck to the scholars, because I viewed them as authorities, and I would spend a lot of time properly studying with the scholars and reading the books and going on long-term courses rather than kind of short YouTube videos or TikToks and short courses.
It's so easy, because I think that's how most of the younger generation of Muslims actually consume Islamic content.
Yeah.
There's a short form on TikTok, or they get lost into like echo chambers on X or Twitter or Instagram Reels, which I think has its place, but like you say, it can be very, very dangerous.
Yeah, I agree.
One point of view.
I agree.
Okay, gosh. Okay, and then it turns out your mom didn't have to worry, because you found yourself at Islamic Finance Guru, IFG, as a community lead. And then after that, over at Nesta. So you've been in the Islamic finance space now for what, maybe 7-8 years in total?
I think a bit less than that. Maybe I'd say about 5 years now.
5 years.
But prior to that, I was working at. So, I mean, my background and profession is in public relations and communications.
That makes a lot of sense.
So originally the plan was to go into medical school. I got into medical school, but I had a South African passport, so I didn't qualify for.
That part of the story. Why have you got a South African passport? Were you born there?
I was born in South Africa. Yeah. Okay. So I had a South African passport. So therefore I was counted as an international student.
Oh, no.
Couldn't pay the fees. Yeah, it was like 22 grand a year. Without living accommodation and all of that. And you didn't qualify for student loans, so it was upfront. And so therefore I kind of went on a bit of a not spiritual journey, a corporate journey of trying to figure out what I want to do. And I was always told that I'm relatively good at speaking, public speaking and such. And so then I was like, okay, comms, PR and comms sounds interesting. Let me go into that. And so I went down that route. And then I found the corporate world Like I found the training was very useful in how to be a professional. But it wasn't the most conducive to my deen, like certain things in the corporate world, like taking clients out to drinks. And that kind of culture just really wasn't me. And it wasn't for me, obviously, as a Muslim. And the thing is, to climb the career ladder in public relations, especially, it's all about like what happens outside of work than what's inside of work. So I kind of made a segue into the East London Mosque, which is the largest mosque, or I should say the busiest mosque in Western Europe. And I started working there, and that really helped me study the Muslim community in the UK, because the East London Mosque are very much the leaders in the UK, I would say, about where things go, how things are done, and a lot of smaller mosques follow suit with what the East London Mosque do. So that, that was a very exciting time. I learned a lot about the politics within Muslim communities, within Muslim charities, how, the charity space runs. But then how I got into Islamic finance was interesting, because during COVID, we had to arrange all of the Ramadan programs online because, no one could come to the mosque anymore. So then I knew about Islamic Finance Guru and their work, and I thought it was amazing. So I, for a online program of which I was the host for the East London Mosque, and it's still on YouTube, I think you can find it. I called Ibrahim Khan to come down and let's do a kind of, not podcast, but I guess it was a podcast about Muslims and wealth. And that kind of introduced me to him. Afterwards, I gave him like some advice on his social media, because I thought that their IFG's social media at the time was very like limited and minimal. And it turns out that Ibrahim was actually interviewing me at that time. So he was kind of throwing questions my way. And then the next thing I know, a few weeks later, he offered me a job, and I took it, and that was
The rest is history.
Yeah, and here I am.
There you are. Wow. Okay, in a different setting, we could go all into the ins and outs of Islamic finance, how you communicate different messages, because like personally, that's a big issue that we face, right? How the public interprets Islamic finance today. But that's not what we're here to talk about. So, in your opinion, what are the biggest mistakes Muslims make when it comes to money and marriage?
The biggest problems, I think, is just communication. And I think you could spread this like line of communication on a lot of the major problems within marriage itself. But let's focus on money. A lot of the times, the thing is, every couple and every person worries about security. It's natural. It's within your soul to want to worry about what happens tomorrow, and you want to have that peace of mind. So for a man, it's always kind of like, okay, I need to provide X. I've got these bills to pay. I've got this to do. What's my security? For a woman, it's the same, especially if she's a working woman. She wants to guarantee her safety and her security. And the thing is, when there's no communication between couples on how the finances are going to be managed, and there's always prior expectations. So maybe you grow up, one person in the couple might grow up with their father taking care of all of the expenses, and the mother doesn't, and she's a housewife. The other person might have the expectation that, okay, both my parents were working and they both split everything 50-50. And because many times there's no communication on what the expectations are, when finally you get to that moment where that talk has to be had, because everyone will inevitably have that talk, whether it's before or after marriage, it causes problems. You'll see that someone will say, oh, but I expected you to do this. And then he'll say, well, look at the economy. I can't take care of this whole household myself. We need to go 50-50. And then the woman will say, but what about this? And chores and the kids, and I can't do all of that. And then it turns into a bit of a argument. And because money is such a sensitive issue, naturally, because it relates to security, it always turns emotional.
Do you think money is often left out of the pre-marital conversation? Because people often talk about, all of the questions that you should ask before you get married, but I don't often hear people talking about the finance side of it.
I think it's kind of like an awkward and sometimes ugly conversation to have, because especially if you don't know what the other side is kind of thinking, it can make you more apprehensive. So say, for example, say you're my prospective spouse. I'll imagine you're a very beautiful woman in front of me right now. And I am coming to your house to take your hand. And I have to, I'm flattering you with gifts, and I'm saying, we're going to have a nice house. We're going to do this. We're going to have children. And then all of a sudden I'm like, well, I would, what bills would you like to cover? Or how you bring it up. It's just such an awkward topic to bring up, because it turns marriage from this fantasy thing where you're all like romantic and everything to something very practical and grey and realistic.
I had a friend who's, when he was looking to get married, the father of a girl that he was talking to sat him down and said, I want to see your payslip. I want to know how much you're making. And I just want to know whether you can provide. Is it acceptable for the other half's parent to do that?
I think different strokes for different folks. I think we live in quite a multicultural society. Yeah. Even globally, we live in a very globalized world where I don't think most like 90% of the world is pretty much connected to this global monoculture we live in. So especially in like places like the cities and hubs. And so what happens is that you've got this global culture and you've got this the local ethnic culture that mixes in with this global culture and creates its own kind of subculture. And then what happens as a result is that people aren't really sure where they stand anymore, because culture, the whole idea of culture is what's normal in society. That's what culture is, what's expected. But when you've got this mix, it's hard to ascertain what's okay for one and what's not okay for the other. So in the Pakistani community, for example, in London, there's kind of like a culture there, especially amongst a certain sub-demographics such as Mirpuris or, from people from Karachi or something like that. They'll have some kind of like inclination, but even then it splits off, especially when there's intermarriages, interracial marriages. Yeah. Then it gets very complicated because every culture has their own expectations. So if a father was to say, can I see your payslip? Maybe in his culture it might be fine, but in their culture it's considered like bad. Sure. Or maybe if you're not further along in the marriage talks enough, then it might be seen as something that, whoa, this is very premature.
Yeah, what's going on?
Or maybe the father will say like, look, I want to see it now, early on, so I know I'm not wasting my time or my daughter's time. So it varies.
It really depends on the person. Thank you for listening to Muslim Money Talk. If you like what you've heard so far, you might be interested in checking out what we do at Kestrl, the Muslim Money app. Kestrl is a service that helps Muslims who want to grow their wealth without having to compromise, whether it's on their belief or user experience or price. I founded Kestrl because of how fed up I was at how poor Islamic financial services were in this country. Often people didn't use them because of how bad the user experience or customer service, and indeed how high on price they were. So Kestrl was the answer to that. If you download the Kestrl app today, it can help you by creating a budgeting plan. Plug in whatever bank account you have and it will create an auto budget just for you. You can then tell us what goals you're saving for and we'll save towards them automatically into pots, and then crucially link you towards Sharia compliant investment and savings products as well. So download Kestrl today and try it out for yourself. Now back to the podcast. Okay, so let's talk about the rights. I want to talk about Meher and I want to talk about prenups. Let's start off with Mehr, because I feel like with women, it's kind of one of two things that ends up happening. Either they're not thinking about it seriously enough, or they start saying, I want it to be a cat, or, anything is fine, whatever's fine. Or they're even told that it doesn't, you should try and ask for a low amount because you don't want to put someone off of marrying you. Mm-hmm. And then on the other end of the spectrum, I don't know how many people this is, but you often see the big cases where it's like someone's asking for £50,000, £100,000, and a really expensive car and a down payment on a house and all of that. Is that reality? Do you think women understand what Meher is, and what is Meher?
It's a big topic, and it's very confusing for a lot of people because generally there's two ways in which it can be seen. If we go back to the point where we talked about financial security and everyone wanting that security for themselves, a lot of people tend to view Mahar as this is the price of my security. I want, 50K. So that's like, just in case you turn out to be an abusive husband and I've had 3 kids with you or whatever. And when I leave that marriage, I've now got some security, or I've got a house in which I'm safe. I can make sure that I'm okay. Because look, marriage is something scary. It is, and especially for women, I can easily see why it would be terrifying. You're leaving the domain of your parents, where there's security, there's familiarity, and you're going with this man who you don't know intimately. You don't know what he's like behind closed doors. And so they want that, okay, this is my backup plan if I've got something. However, shariah wise, the mahar isn't a financial backbone on which that you can stand. The mahar is considered a gift. The mahar is considered a gift from the man to the woman to say, look, I know you don't know me intimately yet. I know you're coming with me and you're leaving everything behind that you know. But here's something to kind of warm you up. Here's something to make you feel like, look, you can trust me. Here's a nice gift. So, and hence why we have narrations of the Prophet ﷺ saying to some of the Sahaba, and I'm paraphrasing here, of course, of the hadiths, but one Sahabi gave as mahar something from the Quran. He taught his wife a surah from the Quran that he knew off by heart. One Sahabi gave an iron ring. Some Sahaba gave money. And it will always vary, because the ulama have this concept of kafa'a. Kafa'a is, I guess you could count as suitability. And what that really means is that when you have a male and a female, you want to make sure that what she's going from is familiar to her, because it makes marriage problems less likely to happen. So, for example, if she's used to having maids and servants, the ulama will argue that she should marry a man that can provide that sort of lifestyle for her, because otherwise it will be very difficult for her to maintain it. And therefore, if all of her sisters got a mahar of 100k or 50k, then she should ideally marry a man that can provide it. Not saying that if she doesn't, it's haram for her or the nikah is invalid. It's just that the ulama are trying to reduce friction. And so, but in either case, the mahar is, the woman has the right to demand what she wants. But at the same time, we shouldn't make marriage difficult for brothers as well, because there's only a very small percentage of people that would be able to pay 50k or 100k or a down payment on a house and all of these demands.
So what's the right amount for a man today? What's the market rate?
I genuinely think it does come down to different strokes for different folks, in the sense that if you're going to ask for the hand of a Saudi princess, for example, versus someone from a working class family, the mahar isn't the price of a woman, but we are looking at what they're used to. Because again, the ulama want to reduce friction. I know cases of sisters who literally got £50, £100, because they were told, don't be materialistic. And I do feel like this is the extreme length of the spectrum. And a funny story, I actually know someone who got £50 for mahar, and then they spent that money the next day buying their new husband a pair of trousers. So I think these are extreme cases. I don't think it should be that less. But I also do think that it shouldn't be as high as what some people make, unless that is kind of the type of I guess financial status of the man. If he can afford to pay 50k.
If he's a multi-millionaire and is giving £50, that would be a bit weird, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
I would say that's very strange, especially when this is meant to be a gift.
Of course, exactly. That's the whole point. So that's where kafa'a comes in. You look at suitability, you look at the man, and I'll talk about my own example, right? Sure. When I got married, I was convinced that I need to get married at the age of around 19, 20. And I got married at the age of 21 to my wife, who was 18 at the time. Okay. I wasn't financially stable. In fact, I was literally an apprentice. And I was getting an apprentice's wage of, I think, about 17.5k a year. And I was about to graduate, and I think it moved up to 22k. But what my father-in-law looked at me is, and I think this is what he looked at me, is that he saw someone that wanted to work and someone that wasn't lazing around. And he saw someone that, will inshallah be able to look after his daughter. So he helped us out. He had an extension to his house. We used to live in that, which was like this nice 1-bedroom flat where me and my wife kind of got the best of both worlds. And my wife didn't ask for a crazy mahar either, but it wasn't a small amount either. So, and I think every couple should kind of find that balance. Don't make it too difficult on the man where he now is in debt going into the marriage, but also don't make it so less that you're devaluing the mahar as a gift. Because think about it, if you're getting married once, think of it as a wedding present that you're getting from your husband.
Yeah, for sure.
So if he can afford to get you a G-Wagon or a 5-star trip to Bali or the Bahamas or whatever, and that's what you want, be my guest. But don't make it so difficult that it becomes very hard for you to get married. You're going to get suitors come and go, but you're not going to get married because none of them can afford it.
So it's a gift, it's not a failsafe.
Yes.
I think is how many people kind of view it as well these days. Do you think that's cultural? Is that where that came in from?
I think it goes back to that deep insecurity that a lot of women feel and have heard from, places like Reddit and TikTok and even online of all these crazy divorces and abuse situations and secret second wives and all of these kind of horror stories. So women are like, I need a failsafe. Because if I'm a stay-at-home mum, I'm looking after his children and he does all of this stuff and he kicks me out because we get a divorce or we separate and we get a divorce. I'm going to be maybe 40 years old with 3 kids, no career prospects. How am I supposed to look after myself? So that's where this mentality comes, and it comes from a place of worry, which is natural, and shaitan capitalizes on that. But that makes it so much more important to screen who you're going to marry.
So let's talk about some of those assurances then, because from a civil law perspective, men have to pay child support and all of this. Islamically, does the idea of child support exist?
I would say yes, because now when we say child support and we say what it means in the English law sense is one thing, but what Islamically men are obliged to do is look after their children. In fact, what Islamic law demands really is that when children are of a certain age, when they're kind of weaned off from dependency on their mother, they go and live with the father full time. The mother, of course, has access to them, but typically that was what Islamic law would say because they are his progeny.
As soon as they're weaned?
Well, not weaned off milk, but more kind of like they're not dependent on the mother. So you could say the age of 6, 7, 8 onwards, kind of. I mean, the ages are like a bit flexible and Islamic scholars might differ on this. But generally at that age, after that, they'll go to the father because they are his financial responsibility. And then the woman has a choice to get remarried. And it was a lot in the Sahaba's time, divorced women were sought after. In fact, it was considered a dishonor in a society to have a single divorced woman. Just be single, as in a divorced woman being single.
Which is why the wisdom having more than one wife.
Of course, yeah. Of course, because the fact is men die more than women. Yeah. There's a higher population of women than compared to men. And the way life turns out is that, especially back in those days, women needed to be looked after by men. There wasn't, this culture of like the Equality Act and this and that, and women could go get any job. It was hard, and especially raising children, all of that. So generally there was a dependency on men, and therefore, if there's not enough men in society, they would have to marry more than one.
So we talked about women wanting to protect themselves and their fail-safes. Let's look at it, I guess, from the other end of the spectrum. And this doesn't just apply to men. It does definitely apply to women as well. But prenups or prenuptial agreements. So interesting story. When I was getting married, Kestrl was maybe 1.5 years old, and we had a few shareholders on board. And when they found out I was getting married, one of them, I won't say who, but he called me up and said, Areeb, I need you to sign a prenup. And I was like, what?
Okay.
And he said, listen, I'm invested in other companies, and I've seen cases where it goes bad, and then this random wife of the CEO ends up with 50% of the company, and the company ends up tanking, right? So I need you to sign that. And I thought about it for a bit, and I decided not to because I thought it would be just a mood killer, right? To say, oh, by the way, we're going to be spending the rest of our lives together. Just sign this in case you decide to, leave me and screw me over like this, right? But is there a place for it? Because in an Islamic contract, you can adjust the marriage contract, the nikah contract, to have different things in there.
Yeah.
What's your take on prenups? Are they appropriate or not?
I think, again, just like we were talking about the security of women, prenups kind of fall on that same category of worry, but for men. especially because men usually are. I mean, a lot of women are working now as well. A lot of women are in high-flying careers and have a lot of assets. But I'm just going to use men for an example right now, but it applies to both. Men have that worry too because they've heard these very same horror stories online of exactly like a CEO's wife taking 50% of the company. We've seen the biggest divorce payout with Jeff Bezos and his wife and their divorce. Bill Gates and his wife, they've divorced. So, a lot happens and a lot of men see this and they're worried. They're like, okay. And especially because there is this view, I don't know how true it is, but there's this view that the court systems in the West, in US and America and Canada, strongly favor the woman's side. And so men are always worried about their own kind of financial stability. There's stories of men having to live in their own cars because they're homeless. The wife gets the kids, so she gets the house as well because the courts want to keep the same
unit together
as much as possible, exactly, without as much different changes to the kids. And so that harmfully impacts the men. Some of these men have, committed suicide. And so a lot of men are like, I need to protect myself. And this causes the same kind of issue that like, I need to get her to sign a prenup. But again, just like we talked about the father demanding to see the payslip, for men, it's a very ugly conversation on like your marriage is very romantic. It's very lovely. It's meant to make you, the man and woman, feel butterflies inside, excitement. But when you go to her or she comes to you and says, look, I've got a lot of assets or I'm going to be very wealthy soon because I'm in this career or I'm a founder or whatever, or I've, invested a lot of my money. I need you to sign this contract in case we split up. It does kind of break that fantasy a little bit because you're saying, look, we might divorce and this is for the best. And I think logically speaking, if I was to take all of the emotion outside of it, I think it makes absolute sense for both couples, especially now that I think I would argue most women work now or most women are on a trajectory of working.
Yeah.
So I think it makes sense for both of them to get a prenup. But because of this awkwardness of how do you address this in the situation? What's the other person going to think? Are they going to hate me? Because of course, in our marriage talks with Muslims, you're still trying to build an impression with the other person.
Yeah, of course.
You don't know them intimately yet. So everything you present to them is going to create the image in their mind of what you're like, rightfully or wrongfully. So when you put this prenup in front of them and say, hey, I want you to do this, instantly you're thinking this person's not romantic. This person's trying to protect themselves. This person doesn't think we can last.
There's an expectation. Yeah, there's an expectation that it's not going to work.
Yeah.
Right? So you're planning for the worst case scenario.
Exactly. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think it's a bad thing. But it's just because there's so much emotion tied into a marriage, it's hard to have that conversation.
Exactly. And what about other things that people put in the contract? The other famous one is that a man cannot take a second wife. Right. Although I've heard different takes on this. What's your opinion on people putting that as a clause in the nikah contract that they cannot marry again?
I think depending on how the wording's done, it can mean different things. So, I mean, the Prophet ﷺ said that Muslims are upon their oaths. So if you take an oath to do something, you should fulfill that oath. We also know that for breaking an oath, there are kafara, there are like expiations that you can do, such as fasting X number of days, and there's other kafarat as well. But I think that, so anything that's put in a nikah contract should be upheld. And it's only fair that if you say you're going to do something, we Muslims are meant to be people of our word. So you should be fair to that. But does that mean it's haram for you to then break those conditions? The scholars don't say that's haram. What they will say is that depending on the wording, it will enact certain things. So for example, if the wording in the nikah contract says, if you take a second wife, the power of divorce will be transferred to the woman, for example. So the woman will have the ability given to her by the man, because he signs the contract, that I can divorce myself. So now she has the power to excuse herself outside the marriage or something.
Does the woman not already have the ability to initiate divorce herself?
Via a khula, but she would have to get her husband to agree to that. So her husband, a khula is a wife basically going to her husband and saying, look, I don't I don't want to be in this marriage anymore. Please divorce me. So it's her initiating.
And
But
if he says no, what happens?
then usually her option is to go to the court.
Go to court. Okay.
Go to the court. So
Which is quite expensive.
yes, which is, I guess in Sharia courts as well, there are opinions of Islamic scholars in the West that say that you can go to the Western court system if you are registered marriage. And if you get a divorce through the Western court system, it counts as a Islamic divorce as well, like one Islamic divorce. So that way is an opinion that is followed too. But yeah, like these conditions in the contract technically are valid, but it doesn't mean that they can't be broken. But should they be broken? How are they broken? That's a big conversation.
It's an oath that you're making to your other half, but
Yeah.
it's not something that renders it haram.
Yeah,
It's
of course.
It's an important distinction.
Because we can't make haram what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made halal, right?
Exactly.
So so those conditions can be there because taking a second wife is of course permissible. But if you say that, look, I'm just not going to do it me personally, and you take an oath on that, that's fine.
So I want to talk to you about rights and obligations between spouses, because there was this phrase that emerged a few years ago that your money is your money and his money is your money as well, referring to women talking about their husband's money. And I think it came from Numan Ali Khan, from Ustad Numan Ali Khan, and they took something out of context. Is there any basis to that? Because I think a lot of people out there still believe that all of a man's money is the right of his wife.
So the short answer to that is no, but there's a caveat. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran says, "Ar-rijalu qawwamuna 'ala an-nisa." The men are protectors and providers or maintainers of women, meaning that financial obligation has been put on the man to look after women. And that means his wife, it means his daughters, it means also his mother and parents as well, I guess father as well. But in the sense that women, it was not common for women to work. Women did work in the time of the Sahaba, but by and large, most women were at home and they didn't work, and their husband would provide for them, or their father would provide for them. And so, but it was never a case of 100% of the father's wealth or the husband's wealth belongs to his wife, because that's his hard-earned money, and Islam acknowledges that. But the acknowledgement also extends that he has to use some of it to maintain his wife and the women that he's in charge of, i.e. his daughters, his mum maybe, for example. So that means, for example, providing living accommodation, paying the bills, providing food, providing clothing. Traditionally, Islamic scholars used it in very like these black and white terms, and in the sense that some scholars would say, what's bil ma'ruf, what is known, so what she's accustomed to. So again, we go back to the analogy, if she's a Saudi princess and she's never lifted a finger all her life, her husband he should maintain that lifestyle for her. Versus if she's not from that kind of background, he should maintain what's similar for her. But again, it doesn't mean that she has rights to all of his wealth and to take it. I think, these small kind of catchphrases are nice to say, but generally, like most of the time, they always lack nuance. Yeah. And it's always nuanced in this kind of case.
Yeah, and I think people just want that black and white answer, but it doesn't really exist. You're using the Saudi princess example a lot. So do you know any?
I don't. I just usually, I usually don't. But they're one of the royal families that exist, so it's just.
Okay, very cool, very cool. So, to summarize, what are the main things that Muslim couples looking to get married, or even if they're married today, what are the main monetary or financial decisions they should be making or thinking about?
I think so. If we're looking at before marriage, like in the conversations leading up to marriage, or in the rishta process, the getting to know each other part, they should definitely talk about financial expenditure and how that's going to happen. Because this conversation will happen. It can just either happen before marriage and you can get everything cleared up, or it will happen after marriage over an argument or a debate.
Well, do you mean who's going to be paying the bills? Are we going 50-50? Are we doing, I'm going to look after you 100%?
Yeah.
Decide that from the outset before you get married.
Yeah, and just be kind of transparent about that. And I think both the man and the woman should keep an open mind when they approach this conversation. Don't be offended because this is part of marriage. That's how you know someone's kind of approaching this from a mature angle. And they should kind of just have a frank but healthy conversation. And if the man feels uncomfortable talking about that with his prospective wife, then it might be better to have that conversation with her dad and say that, look, this is what I'm thinking. What are your thoughts? Don't come in like a brunt hammer and be like, this is what I'm doing, that's it. You don't have a say. Communicate, have a back and forth, and find something that's agreeable. If it's not agreeable, then maybe ask yourself whether it's worth working on. If, for example, you're expecting, a working wife to contribute 50-50, say she's got a very good career, she's a lawyer or accountant or a doctor, and you're like, look, this isn't going to be a traditional family household, let's just do 50-50, it makes life easier on both of us, then have that conversation up front.
Sure.
And be reasonable. Don't kind of rush and be like, no, I have to have my way or the highway, or I follow this ideology, so it has to be this way.
You could frame it in a different way, which is, look, I could look after you 100%, and this is maybe the house we could have. Or if we went 50-50 and dual income, mortgage, this is the kind of lifestyle we could provide, this is the kind of school we could send our kids to.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like more of a positive way of framing it, I suppose.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think absolutely. As long as they have that discussion about thinking about the future, and the way that they should frame it, exactly how you said, is looking at the future as a couple, not kind of, let's, what am I doing? What are you doing? What are you bringing to the table? What am I bringing to the table?
What can I take from you? What am I trying to give to you? Yeah.
Exactly. That's just not healthy.
Okay, fine. So building together. So expenses, we talked about Meher, the amount, and how it should be a gift, and it should be based on the person and their lifestyle and what they might maybe expect. We talked about potential prenup, again, whether it's appropriate or not, and you think it's probably appropriate if, you have those assets to maintain and to protect. It's worth talking about.
Of course.
And then, is there anything else before marriage to discuss?
I think a common one that's coming up nowadays is about mortgages and home ownership. And I think also broader kind of financial planning, like, what's your plan? Some people are like, we want to move abroad, we want to move to Dubai, or we want to, or some people say, no, I want to make sure that I remain in this city because I live here, my family's here.
Yeah.
I want that. So kind of talking about broad plans in a general sense is good. And also talking about things like home ownership, if it's in the horizon for you, what that will look like. So if you're like, okay, are we 50-50 going to split this house and go contribute both to the mortgage? Are we getting a conventional mortgage under the fatwa of most of the European and Western Islamic councils? Or are we going to go for an Islamic mortgage? What are your thoughts on that? Because again, this can be contentious. One person might say, I want to rent forever because I don't believe these Islamic finance products are halal, and I don't want to go for the riba option either. I just want to rent forever. And she might
completely throw off the other person's idea.
Of course.
Right, yeah.
Of course, because renting forever isn't secure. And again, women and men want security in marriage. And if you don't have that conversation, it could potentially get ugly.
We're seeing much higher rates of divorce amongst Muslim couples today than we did in previous generations. I think there's different reasons for that, partly because it's seen as more acceptable than it was in our parents' and grandparents' times. But do you think this is one of the leading causes in your view? I
think money definitely is the biggest thing that couples argue about, because it's just such a sensitive subject. Naturally, it's within the human being's fitrah to kind of protect what they've created. So if you've earned all this money, whether you're a man or woman, you'll want to make sure that you're secure. Again, it goes back to the whole security thing. And you're going to argue about how it's spent because maybe different people have different visions for how they want that money spent. Someone might say, I want lavish holidays once a year or something, because maybe their family goes on lavish holidays and they want to spend. The other person might say, no, I just want to invest it into assets because I want a very comfortable retirement and I want to retire at 45 or 50. So, these kind of conversations can be pretty hard. I think debt also is a big conversation, because if one couple comes in with a big credit card debt and the other person in the couple doesn't know about it, that can lead to a lot of fights. It can lead to a lot of.
It's like, hey, I gave you the Mahar, but now there's like 25k of Amex
Yeah.
I need to be paying off.
And that goes up to the conversation on prenups again, because couples typically, when they get married, their debt gets split between them. So if one person's really like high in debt, but they haven't told the other person or communicate, it could be a deal breaker for the other person.
What examples do you like to draw from the time of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Sahaba? Because I feel like there's lots of examples of beautiful marriages and also dispute resolution from that time. Because you have, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's first wife, Khadija radiallahu anha, and how it wasn't really a typical marriage setup, even by today's standards, where Khadija radiallahu anha was a business owner and much, much wealthier than Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And do you think, what was the wisdom behind that being his first marriage?
I think, subhanAllah, Allah plans as He wills, and He, of course, saw, Allah knew that this will be my final messenger that I will send to the world. And He knew that the da'wah will require assets. So, Qadr Allah, Khadija radiallahu anha, she had 2 marriages previously, and she inherited from those marriages a lot of wealth. And because of that, she had assets under her name that would later go on to help finance the call to Islam, which now, if you think about it, is amazing, because the 1.7 billion or almost 2 billion Muslims that exist today are all really here because of the investment she kind of put in the beginning. Yeah, the first seed investor into Islam. And I think that, it shows that there is no fixed way to think about marriage. SubhanAllah, Allah tells us what we need to know, and He leaves a lot of areas just kind of up in the clouds for us to figure out. So, even the way that Khadija radiallahu anha, she was the one that approached the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam via her servant for marriage. Even in today's day and age, if we were to say to a sister, if you see a brother, go send someone to him and propose marriage to him, she'd say no, like he has to propose to me. And that's not really done nowadays. Even the fact that she was wealthy and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had no problem marrying her because she was wealthier.
It shows you how secure he was.
It wasn't an issue. It wasn't an issue. So I think we as a community need to make marriage not hard.
And then on the other end of the spectrum, you hear about like tough times. There was Ali radiallahu anhu and Fatima when they were really struggling. And I don't know if I'm getting this hadith wrong, right? But I think she went to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and asked him for something.
Mm-hmm.
Am I remembering?
Yes,
right?
she asked him for a servant.
Yes, for a servant. And what did he give her in return?
He gave her some dhikr that she could do instead every day that would help her.
And isn't that subhanallah, alhamdulillah?
Yeah, the 33 and 34 times, yeah.
What was the wisdom behind that?
You see, the thing is, the way that I see it, and the ulama, I'm sure, have written copious amounts of commentary on this, but I'm just kind of giving the perspective that's coming to me at the top of my head, is that in life, we will always find challenges and things will be hard. There are ups and downs for couples all the time. I have never heard of a perfect marriage in my life. There's always ups and downs. Even when you read the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, you see that there were arguments between him and one of his wives. There was a bit of, falling out. There was even some times where he divorced one of his wives and divorced others. So that would happen. And we learned that from the seerah. But what I take from that particular incident is that Fatima, she stuck by Ali's side, radiallahu anhuma, despite all these difficult times. And when she went and asked for a servant, the Prophet ﷺ kind of gave her something that would enable her to be a bit more patient through the hardship. Because I think what we forget as Muslims, because we're so caught up in the dunya, and we live in a very materialistic and extravagant world where all of the luxuries are at our fingertips, flying business class, mansions and luxury holidays and fantastical cars. We see all of that and we're like, yeah, I want this, I want that. Every time we accumulate something, we want to jump the step up. Yeah. But what we forget is that this life is a test. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent us to this world to be tested. The whole purpose of this life is just so that you can kind of rack up as much good deeds as you can. So the wisdom in giving her some dhikr was to be was to ask her to be patient. Be patient with the tribulations she's facing, and Allah will reward you. And that's the idea that, you know, we can always say, I like my car, but it's a bit old. I could get something newer. But do you need that new car? Is it, you know, how are we thinking about expenses in our lifetime? If we actually boiled it down, we could save a lot of money if we just chose to live simpler, more patient lives. But I think, you know, we see the luxury of the world. We see people around us and our friend circle or family circle, and they're like, oh, they got that, we need to get something similar.
Social pressure is very real.
Yeah, 100%.
Forget what's really important.
I mean, I'll give an example of my grandfather, who in Pakistan, I remember my dad tells us that they used to have a one-room house in which my dad, my grandma, my grandfather, and all 9 siblings would sleep in this one room.
Oh my God.
And there was like a kitchen in the corner. And this isn't obviously in Pakistan, but like, you know, our grandparents did it and they didn't really have a problem with it. But we've now been like, oh, now, you know, we need a 5-bedroom house because every child needs to have their own room, and we need to have one holiday a year, and we need to squeeze all of these things in.
That lifestyle inflation, I think it's just natural generation over generation, because everyone wants to give their kids more than they received.
Yeah.
But I think there's always some sort of inflection point, and maybe it's happening now where the economy, inflation, it's higher than it has been in a long time, and people are having to face these real choices, make these hard decisions. So yeah, maybe that's why it's a big cause of issues and subhanAllah, divorce as well.
Yeah, of course.
We're running quite short on time, but I really wanted to talk about one little thing which I saw you were doing. Was it in Ramadan, where you were in Afghanistan?
Yes.
Recently, distributing aid.
Yes.
On that. And that's not something I've seen anyone in my circle do. All the places people go to. What was that like, going to Afghanistan, meeting the people there, seeing what it was like? Is it, you know, like, how is it today?
So I'm a trustee of a charity called Rethink Charity. And I'm a big believer in charity work and humanitarian aid. And I've always had a soft spot for these kind of projects. And for me, I've never had that kind of fear of going into a place that people might consider dangerous. I even went into Syria twice during the war, before the fall of the regime of Bashar al-Assad.
How was that? Did you go through Turkey?
Yes, I went through Turkey. Everything through official channels. Yeah. You know, we had a Turkish charity that kind of we partnered up with in order to gain entry into Syria via the Turkish government into safety mandated areas. But even then, those safe mandated areas still had crazy amounts of like danger to them. They were like, I was told the stories of like, just 3 days ago, you know, ISIS killed 8 people over in this spot right here. And we drove past that spot. And I was just laughing at it. I was just like, wow, okay, fine. We're definitely in Syria now.
Wow.
So, but I mean, I like getting into the nitty gritty myself, down into the dirt and trying to actually understand what the problems are. So my brother-in-law, he's also an aid worker in Syria. So he's told me quite a lot about the stuff that goes on there as well. So our charity, our goal was just to kind of go there and kind of deliver humanitarian aid, but also deliver more projects that are focused on long-term sustainability. Because if you think about it, a lot of Muslim charities are pumping a lot of money into these war-torn countries, but nothing's really changing. And in fact, you know, it creates what we call a food box mentality, where literally there was one project we did where we had apartments and other charities were creating homes. And what would happen is that people refused to leave the refugee camps for the homes, because in the homes, they said in the refugee camps, they get food parcels every week. And they were like, if we go into those homes, no one brings food parcels to us. So we'd have to work for our living. Rather here, we just get monthly stipends.
Okay.
And so our charity kind of focused on, let's empower the people. Let's give them financial literacy. If there were widows, we would buy them things like a sewing machine. If there were men, we might give them like a food cart and say, here's like 1 month's worth of stock. Go earn your own wage. And we'd say that to the sisters as well. And then that way they have a bit more dignity. They're earning their own money, and the country can focus on rebuilding. Also things like healthcare, education, investing in these. So to Afghanistan, Afghanistan's always been a country that I've wanted to visit for a long, long time. And I've had a lot of sympathy for the people there and the plight they faced. But when I went there, I was very surprised because, of course, the only view of Afghanistan that we get here in the West is one of oppression, one where there's this brutal regime that is controlling the people, forcing the women to stay at home. And, the men have to all grow long beards and behave a certain way. It was not the case at all. Like, the flights to Afghanistan were very nice. The food was delicious. We went via Turkey with Cam Air. Very nice airline. I think it's a Afghani airline.
Okay.
And so when we landed, airport was nice, clean. The streets surprisingly were very clean of Kabul compared to, like, I've been to Pakistan multiple times because I've got family there. And I would say the streets of Kabul were cleaner than like Karachi, for example.
Cleaner than Karachi.
Yeah, definitely. So I was so shocked. And unsurprisingly, I saw women, children, men, all carrying on with their day. I saw women outside without a burqa. I'm sure in maybe rural parts, the women are more likely to cover. We did visit some rural areas where we saw more burqas. But in Kabul specifically, like there were some women that were barely wearing hijab. Some women with like open makeup walking around. I'm not saying that they were the majority, but they existed. There were tourists. We saw some Chinese tourists that had, women with their full hair uncovered. And
Chinese are going everywhere. You see them in Karachi, Pakistan all the time now.
They're investing, they're growing.
Yeah.
But of course, like the people were happy. They were living their lives. There's no more war there. How can we possibly think that's a bad thing? And the people, the Taliban was I shouldn't call them the Taliban, I should call them the government now. They were very friendly. They honored us. They looked after us. And Afghani hospitality left me like in shock because I remember there was only a few of us, but they took us to a nice restaurant. They fed us wonderful food, like plates and plates of food. There was a lot left over, which got distributed to the poor. And, they asked us questions about, how we perceived in the West, what can we do to make our image better? Of course, they have their own challenges within their government. The good thing with of the current government right now is that they're all consolidated. By and large, it's one group that have control over the whole country. There might be some pockets of kind of disagreements with the main government, and that leads to kind of political strife there. But by and large, it's very minimal. And there's stability and there's peace. The people are very poor because of obviously 40 years plus of war. But they're very keen to grow. They want the government wants people to come and invest in Afghanistan. You can see the partnerships they're doing with China and conversations they're having with other surrounding neighborhood countries as well.
And I think there's so much optimism for a lot of these Muslim majority countries now, where I think in the age of internet and TikTok and YouTubers, there are backpackers from the West who are going through Pakistan and saying, this is an incredibly beautiful and welcoming country.
Yeah.
We're seeing that in Syria now, we're seeing that in Afghanistan. And I'm really optimistic for the next few decades. Inshallah, these will be the new countries to watch.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even the rural parts of Afghanistan that we visited, beautiful. Like when I looked at the scenery there, I was like, this is what I imagined Jannah would be like. Like, I mean, we can't conceptualize Jannah, but if I had to conceptualize Jannah, it would be something like this, rivers and beautiful mountains and greenery everywhere. And it was fantastic. It was a great experience. And I definitely recommend people actually travel to Afghanistan.
SubhanAllah, what a beautiful way to end this episode. Khizar, thank you so much for joining us. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Muslim Money Talk podcast. If you like what you heard, then please subscribe to Muslim Money Talk wherever you might have been listening to this. Give us a like and share it with someone who you think might be interested. It really, really helps us out. Thank you, Assalamu alaikum, and see you next time.